The RCMP is voicing new concerns over what it calls inappropriate and disrespectful use of social media, specifically Facebook, by some of its staff. CBC News has viewed screenshots of one Facebook page labeled as secret and for men only. Laura Lynch reports, and a warning for our viewers, this story contains some graphic descriptions.
This Facebook page was purportedly created by and limited to rank and file men. It contains sexually suggestive images and other material that suggests there are still problems with trying to eradicate sexism and racism within the RCMP ranks. And just a warning, some of the images that we're about to show you may be offensive to some. This is one of the posts that has upset some female RCMP members who managed to see it. That, along with a caption about Hump Day. Then there's this, a period painting with sexual overtones, with the officer's Stetson covering up the woman's face. The comments underneath include this, should be in the back of a cruiser under a surveillance camera. There are other questionable comments scattered through the pages of the group that was set up last month. Already it counts more than 700 members. It's not clear how many of them are RCMP officers, but CBC News has confirmed that the page's administrators ask anyone who wants to join to provide their official force regimental number. And it is drawing criticism.
It's conduct unbecoming of anybody, not just a police officer. I mean, it shows a lack of understanding of what's going on in society, shows a lack of respect.
The RCMP issued a written statement to CBC News in response to questions about the men's page, suggesting the problem may be more widespread. We are aware of some Facebook groups that may have been created by former or current RCMP employees that contain content we feel is inappropriate. It goes on to suggest it will conduct investigations into such sites. Both on and off-duty members are required to behave in accordance with the Code of Conduct of the RCMP. A member's use of the internet for social networking is also subject to these standards. RCMP members must avoid compromising the integrity of the RCMP or portraying themselves or the organization in a disgraceful or discreditable manner. This statement doesn't say whether these particular members and this particular page are under investigation, but all of this is troubling to female members who have been fighting to get rid of racism and sexism within the RCMP for many years, because it signals to them their battle isn't over yet. Laura Lynch, CBC News, Toronto.
Now, issues with sexism on the force certainly aren't new. And earlier this week, there were also problems with another private Facebook group. An investigation is underway into reports that an RCMP officer wrote that a young Cree man, quote, got what he deserved when he was shot and killed in Saskatchewan in 2016. That has prompted critics of the force to allege racism as well. It's an issue that eats into the public trust, but what should the RCMP do about the actions of members on their own time? I want to bring in our panel to discuss this. In Markham, Ontario, Muneeza Sheikh is an employment lawyer and partner with Levitt LLP. In Toronto, Elamine Abdul-Mahmoud is social media editor at BuzzFeed News. And in Calgary, Rob Breckenridge is a host with News Talk 770. Elamine, let's start with you. Is the RCMP doing enough to address that notion that these kinds of posts eat into a public trust issue with it?
Not even a little bit, and the RCMP has not been doing enough for the last decade or so. I mean, how many times have we heard the RCMP saying, we're aware of this, we're investigating, we're going to look into it, and then nothing really comes of it. The RCMP tells us over and over again, every time that something like this happens, or like how last year there was racial profiling, like a report of racial profiling, they say, we're aware, we're looking into it, and then nothing ever comes of it. The RCMP sort of expresses a value and then doesn't really follow up in terms of actions.
Muneeza, you're an employment lawyer. Can you speak a little bit? Tell us what responsibility an employer legally has to do in situations like this.
Well, I can speak a lot on the issue if I can. You know, at the end of the day, this is an employer, and every employer has a legal obligation to keep their employees safe. And the RCMP is failing at that miserably. All we hear is empty platitudes. And the fact that we're dealing with RCMP employees who have no unionization protection, although I have to tell you, when it comes to, you know, police officers, firefighters in general, their associations really are in, you know, collude with the employer. So I'm not necessarily sure that would be the solution. But we kind of hear these comments over and over again about we're going to try to keep the workplace safe, we're revisiting our policies, and it means nothing. And the problem is, for those who are on the receiving end of the harassment, they aren't able to commence litigation in the same way that any other person would. And so that makes it extremely frustrating. The fact that the Me Too campaign has brought with it, in the RCMP alone, about 4,000 complaints, it does not surprise me at all. And what I find the most frustrating about the story that, speaks to the women's Facebook group, these RCMP women, Peter, they had to basically form the group to support one another and to give each other advice as to how to curb harassment in the workplace. That is not their job. That is the RCMP's job, like any other employer in this country.
Rob, let's let you weigh in, and then we can broaden out the conversation.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, individual comments in a private Facebook group might not constitute harassment, but I think it just plays into the notion that there's just a cesspool of this stuff within the RCMP, that you got a culture that creates these attitudes, and you got an attitude that sustains the culture, and it certainly doesn't help. I mean, if the RCMP is serious about rooting this out, it just creates a perception that nothing has changed. I think the RCMP has taken some steps, but they have been maybe largely ineffective. But, I mean, culture changes don't happen overnight. But I think the RCMP is right to be concerned about this. And if they want to send a message to the public that things are changing, then they need to deal with this. I mean, look, these officers, whether they're on their own time or in a private Facebook group, they're still representing the force. And so what they're doing, by extension, it reflects on the RCMP.
And I mean, to dig in on that, Elamine, I know cops. My uncle worked a long and distinguished career with the RCMP. I know guys that find this kind of behavior abhorrent. They find that it brings, bad repute onto them. How much of this is on the culture within police forces, not just the RCMP, to address this among their own ranks? I know that we have to do issues at a sort of HR level, but among the ranks, Elamine, don't people need to stand up for themselves and say, no, that doesn't look well on me?
I mean, these are conversations that we've been having about policing in Canada for a really long time. We've been hearing from all kinds of different police forces about how they need to root out the kind of culture that allows this kind of stuff to happen. But you know what? I haven't seen a police force sort of take a zero tolerance approach to it that says if you do this, if you participate in this, you're gone. Because here's the thing about being a police officer: the public needs to know that you represent the values of the nation and the values of the force. And if you're going around in private saying, this young kid deserved to die, I think the public has a right, a reasonable right to say, you know what, I'm not sure I can trust the RCMP anymore.
Muneeza, I saw you nodding your head along to a lot of that.
Absolutely, I would agree with those comments, but I think first I'll probably, go speak to the comments that I disagree with. So I think one of your other panel members had mentioned that perhaps, private comments made in a private, or comments made in a private Facebook group are not necessarily harassment. As an employment lawyer, I can tell you the definition as to what constitutes as a workplace, it is broadening significantly, which is why we've heard, statement from the RCMP saying that essentially it doesn't make a difference if it's a private group, if it's something that undermines the core, the core mandate of the organization or flies in the face of the core values of the organization. It absolutely is something that can be and should be actioned. And if you've got a private Facebook group with all men and there's derogatory photos, posted of women, and that and again, there's this view that these sort of photos or this sort of conversation would just make women feel uncomfortable. But as an employment lawyer who literally met with a firefighter today, I'm not going to name the association, I'm not going to name the employer, of course, but I met with a firefighter today who spoke to me about coming forward 2 years ago with allegations of sexual harassment in the workplace against another firefighter who had been off for 2 years. And the second he came forward, because there's this brotherhood mentality, he was targeted and he remains off on a very lengthy disability leave because he was squeezed out of the workforce. This is what we're dealing with. These are the realities.
Rob, you were the one who said the private comment in a private place. That conversation is changing. That definition of what is the workplace is evolving, I think, for the better. Are workplaces and is workplace culture keeping up?
Well, yeah, and I mean, that's a good question. I think the point I was trying to make is that if two individuals are sharing a crude joke or a dirty cartoon between each other, does that mean it's harassment against a particular individual? Is it harassment against any and all colleagues that might fall within their organization? It becomes less clear at that point. But again, they are representing the organization, and they are disparaging the organization, and of course they're bringing disrepute amongst themselves as well. So that's the kind of thing that the RCMP does need to deal with. And as we alluded to at the outset, they've got policies about member conduct, and it's not just when you're on duty wearing your uniform. So if they're using their names, if they're using their badge numbers, if they're identifying themselves as RCMP members, then yeah, it's very much the business, or should be the business, of the organization.
And here's the tough part for me, is that I think a lot of organizations don't seem to understand the reality, and the reality is that what is public has changed. What is public has changed in the last 10 years. And so if you're putting it out there and sharing it with others online, you need to understand that if it becomes public, it is a part of your public image, and you need to respond to it. And the RCMP and many other organizations have just not.
Well, I think it really takes into consideration also this concept of positional power. And so while, I can certainly understand the point about, a crude joke being shared between two people, where there's other people who are watching and maybe they're in a subordinate position, they may feel that they can do nothing else other than go along with it or pretend to laugh. That's the first point. And secondly, when looking at this Facebook group of these RCMP officers, I think there was some discussion, as I understand it, about ensuring that there were no staff sergeants allowed in that particular Facebook group, because there was an understanding and recognition that if staff sergeants, so somebody of a higher rank, if they were in the group, it might trigger an investigation. So they absolutely know what they're doing is wrong, and it's something that could definitely result in disciplinary action against them.
The interesting thing to me is that I think there is a real generational divide on this, that you can see an older generation that I think recognized that there's something wrong here but didn't do anything about it, is giving way to a generation that just isn't putting up with it anymore. Do you see that in employment law, and do you see that reflected in the conversations that are being brought into the workplace now by the younger generation?
I absolutely do. The problem, of course, is while you're certainly right that there seems to be this divide there's a generational divide. The problem is, however, the mothership level is still people from, I'm going to call it the older generation, may not be the best term. And so, and again, going very quickly to the Gandalf report that was released, a few weeks ago, that spoke to, the mothership level here in Canada, all the C-suiters saying, oh, we don't have a harassment problem. We don't have a discrimination problem. And the reason you have that generation saying that they don't have a problem, because they're largely in the senior roles. And so if there is a problem and they admit there's a problem, because they're fiduciaries, the buck essentially stops with them. And so it's a very convenient response, just like the response from management level at the RCMP. It's just empty platitudes.
You know what? I don't want us to overstate how much is changing at the younger level. Those are people who are afraid of their jobs and are afraid to break ranks. I would love it if 100 RCMP officers who are younger, who are upset about this, tweeted me tonight. And they were like, hey man, we're also really upset about this. But we're not going to hear from those people, because they are also afraid of breaking ranks, and they're also afraid of sort of going against this culture, which is to say, the RCMP needs to encourage this. Sorry, go ahead.
The woman who came forward, she wants to remain anonymous because she's concerned, understandably, that she's going to be targeted. That's quite sad, where you're trying to assert your rights to work in a hostile-free, safe and healthy work environment, but you don't want anyone to know that you're trying to assert your rights because you might be targeted.
I want to give a quick last word to Rob before we go. We're almost done.
Yeah, well, and it's been an issue here where I am in Calgary, where the Calgary Police Service has been dealing with these same kind of issues with bullying and harassment, and officers acting inappropriately, and maybe others turning a blind eye to it. I think the public needs to feel that the people in uniform are honest and honorable people, so that they can have faith in what they're doing and faith in their work. And this erodes that trust, and it should be a real concern.
All right, we have to leave it there. Great conversation. Thanks to you all.
Thanks.
Muneeza Sheikh, Alamin Abdul Mahmoud, and Rob Breckenridge. Thanks to you all.